The concept of expanding the United States based on constitutional principles to include territories such as the Panama Canal and Greenland has sparked intense debate among scholars, policymakers, and the general public. Some argue that such expansion would be a strategic move to secure the country's interests in the region, increase its global influence, and provide a strategic military advantage. However, others contend that it would be a clear overstep of the federal government's constitutional authority. There are concerns that it would violate the principles of limited government and individual rights, and potentially lead to a slippery slope where the federal government's authority would continue to grow unchecked. This, they argue, would undermine the very foundations of the Constitution and the principles of federalism that have guided the nation since its founding. As we consider the conservative position on expanding the United States to include the Panama Canal and Greenland, it is essential to examine the underlying constitutional framework that governs such actions. Specifically, the principles of federalism, the Commerce Clause and the War Powers Clause, grant the federal government specific authority over foreign commerce and national defense. At the same time, they establish limits on how the federal government can exercise its authority in these matters. Understanding these constitutional principles is crucial in evaluating the constitutionality of expanding the United States to include the Panama Canal and Greenland. It requires a nuanced understanding of the interplay between federal power and individual rights, as well as a careful consideration of the implications of such actions on the sovereignty of the United States and the rights of its citizens, as established under the Constitution. A conservative position on this issue would argue that any expansion of the United States must be carefully considered in light of these constitutional principles. Any such expansion must be undertaken in a manner that is consistent with the Constitution's grant of power to the federal government. Furthermore, any expansion must be authorized by Congress in accordance with Article 4, Section 3 of the Constitution. This section grants Congress the power to admit new states to the Union, but also places significant limitations on the federal government's ability to acquire new territory. It requires that any such acquisition be made with the consent of the citizens of the United States, either through a national referendum or a vote by the citizens of the state or territory being considered. This democratic process ensures that the voices of those most affected by the expansion are heard and taken into account, and that their concerns and interests are addressed in a fair and transparent manner. Furthermore, an expansion to the Panama Canal or Greenland, therefore, must be carefully considered and subjected to rigorous scrutiny to ensure that it aligns with the principles of federalism, individual liberty, and limited government that are enshrined in the United States Constitution, particularly in regards to the balance of power between the federal government and the states, and that any potential expansion does not infringe upon the rights and sovereignty of the states or the citizens of the United States, as the Founding Fathers intended to protect through the system of checks and balances and the framework of representative democracy. This means that any expansion must be authorized by Congress in accordance with Article 1, Section 8, which grants Congress the power to declare war and regulate commerce, among other enumerated powers. Furthermore, the Constitution's silence on the issue of territorial expansion beyond the existing borders of the United States creates a framework for interpretation that must be guided by the principles of federalism, individual rights, and limited government. In light of these constitutional principles, any proposal to expand the United States to the Panama Canal and Greenland must be carefully scrutinized to ensure that it aligns with the Founding Fathers' vision of a limited federal government that prioritizes individual liberty and state sovereignty. Therefore, proponents of expansion must demonstrate that such a move is both necessary and proper, as required by the Constitution, and that it does not infringe upon the rights of American citizens or the sovereignty of existing states, while also upholding the principles of federalism and individual rights, and inexorably loyal to the Constitution that has been the foundation of this nation.